Mohammed Abu-Nimer is a professor of peace and conflict resolution at the American University. He joins me now live from Washington. Professor, great to have you here with us on TRT World. Certainly not the first time Secretary Blinken is visiting Tel Aviv since October 7. Tell me what's different this time around.
Well, thank you for hosting me. I'm not sure there is much difference. It's the same strategy and tactics the U.S. And the Secretary of State is doing in his sixth visit, I think, to the region to try and put some leverage on Netanyahu to deliver to the U.S. At least two things. One is the issue of the timetable. Unbelievably, the U.S. has been unable to pin down a timetable for the operation of Israel army in Gaza, and that's one issue. And the second issue is, I think, the issue of the safe haven and the safety of Palestinian to return to those who were displaced to return to the north or the center of Gaza. Those are two primary issues. Obviously, as you know, and everybody knows, the primary problems between the US and Israel and the division has been on the day after. That scenario is definitely has not been agreed upon between the two sides, and hence the tension between them.
Professor, the speculation out there among experts is that it is the United States or perhaps President Biden who can put this war to an end. But it's clear that the United States has not exercised enough pressure on Israel to do so. Let me ask you, what would it take for President Biden or the United States to put enough pressure on Israel so that Tel Aviv ends its onslaught on Gaza?
I mean, there is no doubt that the U.S. is the only one who has leverage and can shift the policy or the operation of the Israeli army and the invasion and the whole brutality of it at this point. But let's be frank, the U.S. is not only not stopping the war, the U.S. is continued to aid the war. There are three cards the U.S. can use. One is the aid and the military, and those did not has not been used. On the contrary, the U.S. have provided Israel with two extra loads of military aid since the beginning of this war. The second tool has been the issue in the United Nations and the veto, and the U.S. have used the veto repeatedly in the United Nations. The third card is basically the funding and the aid, and also the international community pressure that has been shielded by the United States, and the United States is not using that. President Biden is still in the mind of full support to Israel, with the green light for the Israeli army to continue, with some occasional warning since October 7 or October 8
Right.
to avoid the killing of civilian as much as possible, and that has been the policy. It did not change.
But
But
Professor,
maybe
yeah,
one more
please
point
go
regarding
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
one more point regarding there is tension internally, domestically. The Democrats in the Congress have been, issuing some more statements against this heavy involvement of the U.S. in this war. There have been 500 employees and political appointees in the U.S. government who have written a letter in November against this type of involvement of the U.S. in the Israeli war. Of course, the public opinion is divided in the US. So there
Right.
is this movement, and the closer we get to the election, the more Biden has to rethink more, and maybe he will intensify the pressure on Israel.
But Professor, undoubtedly there has been a change of tone from the White House over the past few weeks. I remember in the immediate aftermath of October the 7th, the White House said that Washington does not have any sort of red lines for Israel when it comes to its military operations. But now when we look at the rhetoric coming out from Secretary Blinken, he says that during his trip to Tel Aviv, he's going to focus on addressing the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the release of hostages. So certainly there has been a shift in tone. My question is this change in tone only for the public eye?
you know, as I said, you know, military aid, UN veto, and the shift in policy. Those are the three criteria that we can use to assess if there was a change in the US policy. And there hasn't been a major change. There have been some cosmetic statements, you know, cosmetic rhetoric as you describe them, but really the probably one item happened last week, if you notice, that the US government issued a statement against Ben-Gvir and the Smotrich call for the displacement and call for the transfer of Palestinian to Congo. That was very clear, and I think that's the type of injecting these type of statements can be considered, you know, a public leverage that has been used. Other than that, I wouldn't count much on the change in the public rhetoric that we have been hearing in the past 2 weeks, unless you see shift in the
Right.
military aid or in other aspect, as I mentioned before.
Mohammed Abu-Nimer, Professor, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.